Welcome to the Work is Weird Now podcast. Whether you're nearing retirement, entering the workforce for the first time, or caught somewhere in the confusing muddle in the middle, you're likely sensing it and you're probably living it. We know we are, and we want to know why. Listen in as we interview experts and everyday people like you to find out how best to navigate the ever-growing weirdness of work in the modern age. Hi, and welcome to Work is Weird Now podcast. Today we have Victoria Gillespie, who is a seasoned finance professional with a lot of expertise in sustainability. And this episode is part of our Finance Forum series, where we're interviewing people who will be speaking at the event in October. And today we are here to talk about a very just simple, basic question: can finance save the world? So welcome, Victoria. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. So much to unpack there. It's like, where do we begin? It's an interesting point because there's so much to do in lots of different spaces. I think at the moment there's this, everyone feels overwhelmed no matter the field that they're in and no matter the role that they're in. But I think certainly finance, there's quite a lot of focus on us in finance. And certainly when we look to sustainability, we tend to look to our accountants to say, hey, those guys are currently doing the global sustainability standards and they are going to help us with our reporting. They're going to give us that direction. They're going to give us the information and ultimately we'll use that. And that's what we'll use to make good decisions. So I think there's lots of expectations on accountants at the moment. Is it fair? Possibly not, because I think it's a role that all of us need to play. And I think the key is definitely collaboration. And I think that's collaboration internally within your organisations, collaboration with peers, maybe working in different sectors, certainly in the sustainability space that might happen to be accountants. But then generally the greater society as well, because many people that I speak to, whether it's with my working role, whether it's with the volunteer roles that I do, whether it's just a parent at the school gate, people want to make good decisions and they're starting to ask bigger questions now than maybe they did 20 years ago. They're starting to consider what their purpose, what their role is. And most of the time you come back to this sense of we want to make good decisions and we want to live in a good world. And then when you start to unpick that, people are like, hey, I want to live in a world that's more sustainable and it's more, it's kinder, and it's all of these things. And hearing the answers to those questions is interesting for me because it's different things to different people. And I think that is one of the nuances that underpins that, that banner of sustainability.
In our discovery call, even there was a point that you made and you're like, what does that even mean? It's so misunderstood. So should we just start there?
Yeah, can do. I think it's we have these lofty titles, don't we, within organisations, the head of ESG, head of sustainability, head of impact. And when we go, okay, but what does that mean? Like, what do you do day in, day out? And what does it mean for that company? Every job title, the title might be comparable, but then when you look at the detail of what someone's tasked to do, it's so different because in this space, sustainability is so subjective and it's open to interpretation. And what might be appropriate for a behaviour of a financial services firm will be different to a manufacturing company, for example, that operates a global footprint and maybe in some of the poorer jurisdictions and geographies. The way that we behave and what we do, it's not transferable, and we can't make assumptions. And unfortunately, what I find quite a lot is people make a lot of assumptions and they sort of say, oh, work in sustainability, and they go, oh, you're just a tree hugger. So there's these. I did have an interesting conversation once with a hedge fund manager. I'm not going to name names, of course, but he said to me, oh gosh, he said, you need to help me write my strategy and my document. I said, yeah, I'm here to help. And he said, God, you're not a tree hugging vegan, are you? Because I don't like those.
God.
I laughed. I just said, no, I'm here to help you. I'm not, but it wouldn't really matter, to be fair, if I was. But again, that sort of that prejudgment and that pre-assumption that it's vegan, that you work in an environment, that you're here to save the planet. It's not the only thing that sits, if we come back to the question, within the sustainability spectrum. It's good corporate citizens, it's good behaviour, it's good ethics. It's all of these things that underpin. We start to think about, is it fair that a corporation doesn't pay tax within a certain jurisdiction? It becomes really, really nuanced. And even that falls into the sustainability bucket. It's kind of a catch-all term, but the interpretation that really sits with the board of the individual companies that need to adopt those policies and those practices, because they do ultimately exist for a reason, and that reason is generally to make money. I think as an accountant, I'm quite good at saying that, where's the money, where's the data flow, where's the money flow? But it does come back to, are they a good company to work for? Do they behave in a way that makes their employees proud? Where's the additional contribution? And the contribution isn't just financial. It's very often wider and bigger than that. So I think that's where some of the issues come. When we come back to the what do we even mean by that?
Mm.
That's what for me comes through when we hear all of those points come across when we have these conversations.
Yeah, you defined it so eloquently in the discovery call. You said, at its true core, ensuring the business will still exist in 12 months to serve its employees and clients. But that beyond survival bit is making the world a better place through products, services, employment, and that environmental impact. Like those layers just really sat with me, and it brought it back down to like real layman's terms of it.
It is, and exactly that. So I started in the world of work as an auditor, and I think you come back to this principle of going concern, which is a really boring term for non-financial folk, but it basically means, is that business going to be around in 12 months? Is it going to exist? And it used to be back in the day, we'd look at that and go, okay, well, what's on their balance sheet? Have they got all of these liabilities? Are they going to be able to pay? Has anything happened post year end? Can we sign off the audit with good conscience? And the board telling us everything. But now we're starting to think about, okay, are they going to exist? Because are they behaving in a way that actually, are they going to be putting themselves full of some employment law or something else? Are they going to behave in a way that people are going to want to work for them? So again, it comes back to those other considerations as well. So it's wider. But when people ask me what sustainability is, I come back to that going concern principle. Is it going to exist in the future? And then start to think about all of the tangible things that we spoke about in the discovery call.
I think for me, what's become particularly confusing in the past few years, let's say, sustainability has always been a word that, in my experience, has been, as to your point, defined a variety of different ways, misunderstood a lot of the time, and so on and so forth. But actually now, it also feels like the sort of fundamental ideas of what good looks like are being challenged, right? So we're having some things that we all thought were good. And then now all of a sudden we've got sort of political winds pushing in opposite directions saying, actually, that's not good. We should be focusing here. How do you actually, as a company and as a leader within a company, retain that North Star about what good actually is?
Yeah, you're absolutely, I think for me, you're absolutely spot on. And I think the politics, everything else, to me, that's just noise in an already crowded space. I think if we come back to what was the business designed to do, what makes it great, what makes it a good employer, what makes it a good producer of a service or a product, that should be the North Star. And then it's the practices that you implement to allow that to continue. So do we need to evolve some of our internal practices? Hey, do we need to, okay, we didn't offer that policy, but actually should we start to go a bit above and beyond on there and increase, for example, some leave? Or should we give compassionate leave where people have got caring responsibilities? Should we consider the way that we need to evolve to make sure that we remain an attractive place to work for, but also someone to partner with? So I keep on coming back to places to work, but also it's the people that you work with as well. So are your clients going to be proud that they partner with you, or are they going to be embarrassed? And I think when you start to think about your sustainability strategy, it is just the way that you behave as an organisation, and all of the policies, and that's just the detail. So for me, I like to think about sustainability as not a separate policy or a strategy in its own right. It's just the way it's actually the business strategy. What is it set up to do? What's its core purpose? And actually what would make the board members, I can't speak, I'm not on the board myself, what would make the board members happy? And the shareholders happy? What do they want to see that company achieving in X number of years? And it often does come back to financial just because we have to be pragmatic, but it shouldn't just be the only thing we consider. There should be other good practices that come out of that. And then I think those behaviours lead to lots of additional byproducts. Generally, some of those byproducts are actually financial gains as well, which is really interesting because then we come into the sort of debate about the trade-off, and very often we find that actually it's not a trade-off.
What examples have you got of that?
So, for example, you might spend a lot of money on, I'm just trying to think of a live example here. So some clients will say, hey, I'm not going to spend loads and loads of money on, not my clients, people that I know in the network. I'm not going to spend loads of money on implementing this new system or for example, giving volunteer days because we run timesheets. We don't like that policy. We just don't do it. We won't support it because as far as we're concerned, if people are not working and they're volunteering, it's not productive. It doesn't add to the bottom line. It looks bad. However, when there's been for a small number of companies that were allowed the data to be collected, they showed that actually staff happiness increased, and that, guess what, they were more productive during the day. And then the company were able to collect the metrics as a result of the volunteering to say what contribution their staff led towards sustainable development goals. So because they had the evidence to back up the claims they made in their financial statements, they were able to use it within their annual reports, and their shareholders were also happy. So again, it's not a case of giving up one at the detriment of something else. It's actually, let's try something and be creative and think about what can we experiment with, and then how do we collect the metrics that support it, or how do we seek the feedback that tells us if that's a good decision. I think you can't have decisions without looking at the consequence afterwards. I think that's just personally, that's pointless.
Yeah, it's a great example. Thank you.
And why is finance and the finance role and the finance function so critical to the transition to a sustainable world? Because I would think historically people don't necessarily associate finance with sustainability, broadly speaking.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right, and it's interesting because, again, from a peer group perspective, you don't often see, although you do more and more, but you didn't back in the day. Very often, when I go to sustainability events or conferences, you might have heads of marketing there, you might have heads of investor services or investor relations. You certainly didn't have the legal people now and the accountants that you have now. I'm seeing more and more that it's aligned to people in different roles. So they tend to be co-hatted with risk, finance, or legal. So head of legal I've seen as well. And it's really to, I think, not that others are not professional, but I think the idea is to align it more to a professional skill set and behaviours that you'd expect of the people that hold those other roles as well. So with accountants, you get sort of analytical thinking, you get accreditations, you've got a tie-up between the financial metrics and the non-financial metrics, which is why it does make sense to sit within finance, because you've got cause and consequence. And then, from a legal view as well, you're just considering this at different angles. So I think that's really interesting, but I think to have it in isolation, I think potentially is quite not only lonely, but fairly dangerous for people, because, they've got, I think there's a lot of expectations certainly with in-house heads of ESG or sustainability or impact. There's a lot of responsibility that's on their shoulders. And I think I, for example, as an accountant, can look to my accountancy body and my peer groups and say, hey, what have you got as a resource to help me? How can I look at these decisions? What accreditations can I take to plug any gaps from a knowledge perspective? And you kind of look at your tools of resources. And I wonder if people are not the accountants, they're not the finance. I wonder if I don't know what they would have available to do that.
Mm. And so is there something about where finance sits relative to a business that allows it to have a specific view on sustainability that is different from other functions in the mix?
I think so, because everything touches finance, doesn't it? And I think the currency that we all lead to and look to, the North Star, is money. So, whether that's purchasing, we've got procurement involved, we're always considering, the sustainability piece as a secondary point. So very often you might have your head of procurement, they're looking at, okay, what's my policy? But also now we've started to integrate and look at, okay, what's sustainable purchase practice? And you kind of tag that on. But ultimately those teams tend to hang and sit within finance. So before you've made that commitment, you're already considering the sustainability or a sustainability angle that's relevant to that organisation.
If an organisation has not looked very closely at the subject of sustainability in the context of its day-to-day operations or its kind of long-term forecasting, where would you suggest it starts? What's the first thing to look at?
This is interesting because I get this a lot. People go, oh God, where do we start? And you don't really care about SMEs, and we're the biggest group in the UK. I think that's not true at all. I think, sustainability or sustainable practices could just be as simple as looking at some of the policies that you've already got in-house. How do you employ your staff? What do you do to support them? What do you do to help out on the social aspect? If you're a services organisation, arguably your staff are your most important asset. So what are you doing to support them that could increase their productivity, increase their happiness? Those all sit within a sustainability banner, and I don't think people realise that they're probably already doing something that's captured and covered by it, because they see it as something separate to the organisation rather than as the way that they should just operate day to day.
And I suppose once they've made that first step, or a few more steps after that, how do you think they can shift from being that almost corporate buzzword into something that their people and employees feel really proud of?
I think it depends what the practices are. So very often when people say to me, for example, well, I've got no idea what my company does in sustainability, the accountant I am, have you read their financial statements? Like, if these are non-financial folk, of course, have you read their financial statements? No, well, why don't you go and have a look? Because very often they'll put something in there, and if there's a policy or something that you're unaware about, you can then circle that back and go and have a conversation, or maybe consider, you know, for example, if peer groups are doing volunteer days or something else, why don't you go and suggest that and see if that's something that the company would be open to, or charity days or charitable giving, contributing to industry association events that are charity led. Like there's all of these things that you could do to encourage those behaviours. And I think what happens is people, in my experience, people try one thing, or they'll try it and they'll tweak it and they'll pivot and they'll try something else. But the momentum, once it starts, it carries on. And because generally they receive good feedback. I mean, you can see some tweaks because of political plays, and you can see rebranding, rewording, but essentially it's all the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think back in that original discovery call when we were talking about what should the main question be, there was almost that, it is the can find it save the world, but it's also the bigger problem. It also could be, why should I care? And that's from the employee base as well. Like why should they care? And actually there's a job to onboard them and take them on this journey as well, because it's not going to be solved by one policy, right? Or by one person. This really takes a collective effort.
Yeah, I think it should be, so the behaviour should be encouraged by everybody, because at the end of the day, we're businesses that are working with lots of people, and we're all human first and foremost. So what do people want? What are their drivers? And understanding that helps you adopt the practices and the policies that they want, and the behaviours, of course, come after that. But why should they care? Well, ideally, they want a contribution, and it really, I think, without speaking about or for anyone specifically, I think most people get up in the morning with a sense of purpose. So there's something they want to get out of their day, and helping move the company forward, or just achieving something, or adding or performing something in a way that makes them feel good, generally is positive for them as an individual, but also for the company as a secondary byproduct as well. So yeah, I think purpose is really important, but knowing what that is down to the individual, and not everyone's the same, of course.
What do companies often get wrong when it comes to sustainability and finance's role in that?
I think disconnect, which is the point that I kind of alluded to earlier. It's a policy over here that someone else is responsible for. And when we've got an issue that falls loosely under that, we'll go to them and then make it their problem. Whereas if we can adopt it as something that just the business does, and it's led from the CEO and it's integrated, for policies, procedures, practices, I don't want to come back to the environmental piece, but all of these different things, if it just becomes part of the culture, then it helps move the business forward. It helps move the organisation forward. It helps people feel better for the companies and the organisations they work for.
And beyond the financial metrics, are there particular metrics that you value over others in terms of measuring impact and success of sort of sustainability approach?
Don't want to go off on a technical tangent. Basically, you've got the metrics that you have to collect, so things that you can report on. But I think the interesting thing is what we see that people choose to collect. So you've got some drivers for reporting that sit inside and outside finance. So very often you'll get your financial metrics that you need to report on. So you need to put in your financial statements that fall under sustainability, but you'll have your non-financial metrics that you also need to collect that are more people-led. And I think things like, and it sounds really woolly and fluffy to say it, but what I like is feedback where you've got a regrettable turnover reduction because people are happier to work there. That's quite nice to see. Or when you start to see that the company is implementing additional training, or that they're starting to offer things that will be for the benefit of the employees that work there, and ultimately the company, and then their clients as well. So I think for me, it's always okay, well, what are they doing? But also the skeptic in me always says, but what are they not reporting, and what are they not saying? What should they be saying that they're not saying? So we need to be quite skeptical when we approach that as well. But the really interesting stuff is the day-to-day case studies, and when you see investment within areas where there's a social housing needs, and actually there's been a regeneration in a certain area, and actually the employment's gone up, or where people have been able to buy or invest in something, whereas they might not have been able to before. So for me, it's those softer stories that I think are really interesting. And then when we come back to, okay, well, what was the input into that, and what was the decision behind it, and what's the evidence and the support that you can use to be able to storytell. I think some of the more human stories are actually the most interesting, rather than the financial numbers.
Have you got any standout ones that you've seen and you think that's bloody brilliant?
Just try to think. So investment in low impact areas. I think they're certainly, believe it or not, in the US. So there's a real drive in the US to invest within real impoverished areas. It's a bit controversial, but basically the investment within these areas leads to housing for those that are homeless, but also the investors have to make sure that they are able to offer a certain number of jobs to like low-income families, people that may not have an education or a formal education. So they have to do all of these things to attract that type of talent, to employ people, might be diverse people, for example. There's a real story actually behind what they need to do, but the weird benefit is they get tax breaks for doing it as well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is
That's
quite
cool.
controversial in
Yeah.
itself, because
Yeah.
actually the story is one of lovely, look what we've done. We've got so many families off the street. We've employed these people that didn't have this golden education, that were unemployable in X areas normally. But what you don't hear is okay, but actually the driver for doing it was also this. So you tend to hear the
Exactly.
balanced story. But some of what for me I find really interesting is the story. No, I'm just trying to think. So investment, to your point, there was a case study. It's not mine. It's one that of hearsay. So forgive me, the details could be sketchy, but the idea is quite interesting. So many people will, for example, look at private equity and think, oh, it's just about the numbers. It's just about X, Y, Z or investments. Whereas one entrepreneur apparently came up with the idea of, the patches that you have for diabetes, apparently came up with that. And he worked with a big investment house to develop those patches. And actually, apparently, that's really helped specifically diabetic children. Apparently. So again, the drive was to do good rather than to make money, but the byproduct is they've made money, quite a good investment for the shareholders and for everyone else. But the benefit is very much a public one.
So, I mean, these stories suggest that profit and purpose often can dovetail in a way that creates value for all. But I would assume in your line of work that you often come up against tensions between those two things as well. And how do you deal with that? Or is that a false choice?
You've just took the words out of my mouth. That was literally what I was about to say. I feel like that dovetails seamlessly, but it really feels like there's probably tension as well.
I think every time we look at a practice that we recommend to a client, or we look at a company that wants to implement, we have to look at the idea and go, well, okay, that's lovely, but is it practical? Can we really do it? Does it make sense? Because I've had this, crazy conversations with people that are like, hey, I want to come up with this product. I just need the investment of like 50 million. And then you look and you go, well, where's actually the benefit? Not just the financial benefit, but also what benefit are you really bringing to society as a result of that new product to market? Like, is it just an ego-led thing because you want to say that you're doing this really good, environmentally friendly service or product, bringing this product to market? So, but very often you'll find that the two they are linked, but it's not often at the detriment of another. Sometimes we need to become creative and say, well, actually, we want to achieve this particular thing, or we want to go and I'm just trying to think in the context of sort of clients. So we want to invest in this particular company. We want them to get to X. We want their sustainability strategy to be embedded, and we want them this to look like adopting this practice, that practice, and meeting these framework requirements. They've got these industry associations that they report to, and all of these things. But actually, it's not practical, and it's too far. It's we're going to be on balance. We're probably going to be to meet all of those needs or those requirements. Actually the benefit doesn't outweigh the cost. So let's do part of it and then we'll revisit it and then we'll do more if we need to. So we'll seek feedback along the way. So it becomes a longer build.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be absolutism. And I think sometimes that's what people miss as well. When we're even talking about getting started, people assume it's this something that's far off in the future they couldn't possibly achieve. It's not relevant for them. But what we can do is take responsibility for the small steps to get us there and appreciate that we can't always do everything, but we can do something and then we can revisit it and come back. So it's definitely not set in stone, and it's definitely not an all or nothing.
Are there any shifts in kind of policy or regulation that would make a big difference towards you being able to have the kind of impact that you want, or invest in things that will have a greater impact?
Gosh, that's a really big question. I definitely don't feel qualified to answer it. I think it's certainly in the fund space, there's a lot of movement actually, and the government have been the UK government specifically. My role is global, so I work with a lot of different regulators and lots of different landscapes. But specifically in the UK, it's interesting because the government and the FCA are looking to do things. So they are looking to unlock, for example, pension fund investments that they can invest into sustainable or impact funds. So there's a whole SDR, sustainable disclosure regime, that's come out in the UK. And really that's trying to unlock investment into certain areas, certain portfolio companies, locations even, where we can benefit from, things being redeveloped, or I don't like the terminology that we use, like making brown to green. I don't like that terminology because it sounds awful. But for example, you can take a company, you can invest in a company that doesn't look great, and they need to change some of their behaviours to make them more, socially relevant, and also, let's say the environmental word, but more environmentally friendly. And that takes time, it takes investment. Whereas certain regimes now that are coming in, we look at, okay, well, we appreciate and recognise that's going to take time. So to begin with, that might look awful on our book of business, but over time, when we do this investment, change these practices, which do take time, they're not going to be overnight, it will become better. And I think having that optimism and having the process in place to allow that to happen, but also the confidence to be able to relay that story to your investors, is really important. I think there used to be this concern that people couldn't invest. For example, we saw it a while ago, didn't we? When people said, disinvest in fossil fuel companies and, step away from and stop this happening, stop that happening. And at the time I thought, okay, well, that's brilliant, but what's going to happen tomorrow? Like, if we switch it all off today, what's the plan B? We don't have a plan B. So we need time to get there. I think what we need to do is government and policy to help us unlock that along the way, to support that process and not necessarily bar it, or not make it harder than it needs to be by putting too much red tape in place, but certainly to encourage that, and make it okay to do it, for people to do that. And also, I think society to accept that stuff takes time.
Yeah. So it's difficult. It's a tough sell to society at the moment, I think, because everything is moving so fast. So there have been some accusations of sort of greenwashing in the financial sector. What do you think about that? Is that fair?
I think the financial services sector is stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you get some organisations, and I think it comes back to where the disclosure requirements are sat within an organisation. So you might have organisations, for example, where your chief risk officer, chief legal, is responsible for the reporting and the messaging that's supported and disclosed generally by marketing person or CEO, if it's a small organisation. But generally they'll be supported by, and they might be looking at that, so can we say it? Do we have the evidence to support it? Could it be misinterpreted? You have to have these sense questions. So how is it going to be received in the market? I don't know whether people have really done it. So again, we've got this, there's unintended and intentional. And I think it's important to recognise the difference, where people have developed practices, or they've said, hey, I want to sign up to this framework, I want to be net zero by 2030. The commitment they made at that point in time was genuine. And what's happened behind the scenes is the requirements have changed, the offset carbon credits now, and all of these things that kind of feed into that story have made their job harder and made that commitment harder. I think what's important is being brave enough to say, okay, we've had to tweak it, we've had to revise it. It's definitely done with the best intentions. We've done everything we possibly could have done, armed with what we knew at the time, to meet that target. And then make sure that you're relaying the same, you're relaying the message in a really clear, concise and non-misleading way. But I think being honest, I think in itself is quite a brave thing. And I think I'd like to see more organisations being a bit more brave, rather than
communicate, right? Communication has to underpin all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. But clear, really concise, rationale behind it. And then, okay, well, you didn't meet that, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And if people have unintentionally made a disclosure or come out of a commitment that they can't meet, or they can't, or, they did it based on, I don't know, some suggestion from a marketing agency or someone, where it was an uninformed decision, they need to take responsibility for that and make steps in place where they can put, where they're able to make that good. Or
because people respect that so much more, being told what the actual truth, rather than, oh, here's the carpet, let's sweep it under. People want to know what is going on, what the scenario is, and actually how we're going to move forward from it, even if it's a negative piece of information that's being shared. That's the whole transparency piece, right? But it just doesn't happen as well as we like.
Which is such a shame, because transparency is one of the key things. When you work within the sustainability space, or even with businesses, and certainly as accountants, we're encouraged to be fully transparent with what we do. So everything is, say what you say you're going to do, and you
Yeah.
document everything. And I think the financial services sector, specifically in the UK, is so highly regulated. You have to write everything down, even things that are subjective. Every time you make a decision, what was your rationale? Who said it? Who's going to take responsibility for it? And I think it's a shame when you have these claims of greenwashing as well. I'd like to see someone come out and say, actually, yes, it was wrong, or hey, we did this and we didn't mean to, but this is what we're doing instead. But the other side of that is the practices that I see day in, day out, where people were so scared that some of the practices they do internally, they don't actually disclose because they're too scared of being, oh, well, actually our particular company does X really well, and we know we do it, but we're not going to tell people we do it because we're scared of being put in the greenwashing bucket, or we're going a little bit beyond our competitors, and therefore we don't want to put our head above the parapet. And I think that's arguably a shame as well, because I think some of those good stories and good practices are the things that will differentiate a company. But what you have is people that have been so scared off by some of the headlines that we've seen that they're just head down and getting on with the day job.
So we are obviously a podcast about work. So I'm curious, what is it that got you into this field, and what advice would you give to people who are looking to move into sustainable finance or sustainable investing?
Gosh, what advice would I give? I think for me, the road that I've taken to get where I am today is it wasn't linear at all. I think it was one of, okay, I'm bored doing that, but that interests me, so go over and do that. So everything that I've done has been very much with a governance lens and best practice. And I think that really lends itself well to sustainability, because everything that you say, it can't just be a marketing term or a very lofty, acronym or something like that. It needs to be really simple, concise, and then you need to be able to say, the very simple, the what, why, how, and when. You need to be able to have that skill set to work out how you communicate with your internal and external stakeholders as well.
Yeah.
The advice I'd give to people, because this space, I mean, if you look at LinkedIn or you even look at the news, it's just so noisy that I almost feel sorry for people that are trying to navigate into this space, because there's just so much that you could be distracted by, and so much you could fall down like a rabbit hole if you start to investigate one thing or look at one thing. But there's also so much opportunity, because there's so many different subsections and areas that people could potentially work in, that if something is of interest, go and explore it in more detail, and you probably will find a sustainability angle to it. So definitely one of excitement, but trying to block out the noise itself is definitely a skill set that I would encourage. If people can do that and focus, then
That's a tough skill set. I'd like to have more of that skill set, I think.
I think all of us would like to have more of that, but especially like you touched on earlier, with the geopolitics and the headlines, and unfortunately this preconceived notion that everyone thinks they know what sustainability is and what ESG is, and hey, you're the climate person. Well, no, actually I'm not. So again, you've got all of that noise going on, and really what you want to do, or what most of us want to do, is to do a job, do it well, but also leave our jobs when we go home at night and go, oh, actually I've made some progress.
Looking forward to like 10 years, 10 years, what would you hope's changed between the relationship between finance and sustainability?
I'd like to see there more integration between the two. I'd like to see more collaboration internally with most organisations. I mean, it's a lofty dream, to be honest, but what I'd love to see now, back when I started work like 25 years ago, compliance used to be a siloed thing. You'd have a head of compliance, and everyone would go, oh, it's the compliance thing, or I need a decision, that runs the compliance person. But now most of us need to do the training like we need to do our quarterly training, and compliance is everyone's problem. Like everyone's responsible for making sure that you comply with, whether it's a regulation, whether it's a practice, but compliance is at the forefront of our minds. And I'd like to see sustainability there as well with finance, so that no matter what job you've got within an organisation, you're aware of how the entity or how the company is behaving. You know what the culture is, and it's one of collaboration, and it's not just a finance problem or a sustainability problem. It's okay, well, how can we all do this? Actually, lots of collaboration, I think, will be key to making sure that organisations meet their goals, which most of them are being driven by government commitments anyway, and country commitments.
So given all we've talked about today, then, can finance save the world?
It can, but with help from others.
Okay,
Great answer. Great answer.
So at the Finance Forum in October, on October 7th, your session is called From ESG to Sustainable Finance, Embedding Purpose in Financial Strategy. What are you hoping that people will take away from that session?
Hopefully something different, and understanding that ESG isn't the be all and the end all. So those three, environmental, social and governance, are not the only things they need to be considering, that it's broader and bigger than that, but also one of optimism and excitement around what that means and what that could mean for them when they go away. So I'd like for people to at least take away one thing, so to help them think about, we might be able to invest in X, or we might be able to go and do X, or we might want to bring back an idea to our day job to be able to say to a company, why are we not doing that as a best practice? So really one of ideas and generation, but hopefully action that follows.
How can people find out more about you in addition to the event coming up?
Gosh, LinkedIn, probably.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely speaking to you both, and I could speak about this 24/7, which is probably awful for anybody else, but I've really enjoyed myself. So thank you for having me as a guest.
Thank you so much.
We'll hopefully see you in real life at the Finance Forum.
Yes, exactly.
See you then. Look forward to
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.